The name's that. Today's Thursday, and we do webinars every single week. We are going to be taking a deep dive into the magical world of Savant Syndrome. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. You've either got people who see it as, idiot syndrome, which it was originally known as, and then you've got the other people who see it as the genius syndrome. Both of these are incorrect. We often talk about the spiky profile here at exceptional individuals, and this is appreciating the fluctuation of abilities. So neurotypical people are quite borderline with their skill set. There's a bit of wibble. Neurodiverse people, you might be really good at one thing, not so good at another thing, really good at something else, and you see it quite spiky. Now, Savant Syndrome, this is really interesting because your spikes are they are ridiculously high, but the disadvantages really noticeable. So before you think, yes, X-Man, sign me up, dip me in radioactive waste or however you get Savant Syndrome, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And there are different types. We've got neurodevelopmental savants, we've got acquired savants, and we've got ones we're not even aware of. We've got lots of things to investigate today. Now, typically, we talk about dyslexia, dyspraxic, autism, ADHD. Today, I would say Savant Syndrome is more closely related to autism, but do not let that fool you because you can absolutely have Savant Syndrome and not have autism. You're just more likely to also have autism. Here's me. I know nothing about Savant Syndrome, so forget about all my credentials. I had to learn this all from scratch, but it's something that I find really fascinating and interesting. I am not a savant. I wish I was, but no. As we go along today, maybe some of you might think, I wish I was one. And then you might realize, I'm glad I'm not. There's always trade-offs. Here's our team. You got myself today, and you've got April. Got a friendly bunch. Now, our last webinar was, do I have developmental coordination disorder, aka dyspraxia? We were looking at dyspraxia from a bit more of a clinical perspective and the signs, characteristics, symptoms, traits, all this lovely stuff that you might have if you were dyspraxic. And we're looking at all different kind of avenues and viewpoints. If that's something you think that sounds interesting, I have 32 minutes and 54 seconds to entertain myself. Then go on our YouTube channel. Savant Syndrome. What is it? This image is normally what we refer to when we talk about gifted. You've got to have, first of all, above average intelligence. Now, this is already a bit broad because intelligence is so wide. What happened if you were really above average in some areas, but really below average in others? Does that still count? Task commitment. How are you able at actually seeing things through? And creativity. And if you get all these three together, ideally, you've got a gifted individual. Now, people can either start off quite average or below average even, and then become gifted. People may be gifted from an early age and it might simmer out, or you might be gifted all the time. It is, again, a broad spectrum. Now, here are a couple of terms, just so we're all on the same page. I normally say potential new terms, but let's be real, I'm sure a lot of you haven't heard of these, so I just put terms. Now, all of this stuff was done from loads of research. Don't bother reading it. It's made for ants, but I assure you it's been referenced. So first of all, we got Savant Syndrome. Exceptional skills in those with developmental disorders. Now, this is going to be interesting because that is the term, developmental disorders. But as we go on, we'll realize that's not always the case. Then we got a prestigious savant, keep pronounced prodigious savant. This is your genius level abilities. This is super rare. So autism's fairly rare, not really that rare. Then Savant Syndrome, really rare. And then prodigious, whatever, genius level savants, really rare. So we are talking about a condition. We'll go over the exact numbers and why we don't actually know them soon. But this is extremely rare. We got the talented savant. So these are the ones that if you were to know someone who has savant abilities, you're probably going to be on this one. Notable skills. They're just a little bit below genius level, but you know what? They're definitely smarter than the average bear. They've got some skills. We have a splinter skills, highly developed skills in savant. So it doesn't mean that you're an all-round bona fide genius, but you might be exceptionally talented in, say, art or music, like one area where you had put all your eggs in that basket. We got the autistic savant, and this is a different category because once again, you do not have to have autism in order to have Savant syndrome, but you will see it is quite likely if you were. So extraordinary abilities in individuals with autism. The last one, which I think is also really interesting, acquired Savant syndrome. So this is development of savant skills after a brain injury. And this is actually can happen in most neurodevelopmental conditions. There is often an acquired counterpart. So acquired dyslexia, acquired autism, acquired ADHD. It's not actually that same condition or syndrome or way of thinking, but it has the same output or explains very similar. It's just the way that the brain got to that is a different route. So hopefully I'll show you some lovely case examples today of different savants throughout the eras. You'll notice there's not that many. Like over the last few hundred years, we could probably count them on a couple of hands. So extremely rare. First of all, what comes to mind when you think of a savant? Are there any words that kind of pop into your brain straight away? Or maybe you never heard of the term? I'm asking this just so we understand, I think a little bit about stigma. Now, stigma can be good or bad, but it's our preconceived ideas about what something is before we started to learn. Oh, savage. I could see why you might think that. The Good Doctor. Yes. You know, I still haven't seen that, but I do. The actor, he plays, who's a serial killer and psycho, Norman Bates. He's quite good in that, actually. He also shows a lot of autistic characteristics in that. I don't like that association, but still, he's been typecast. Rayman. Yep, absolutely. What a great film that was. The big question is, was it overall positive for Savant syndrome and the autistic community, or was it more damning? I think there's pros and cons you can take from both of that. Okay, genius. Yep, genius now that is a word which I think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? We all want to be geniuses, but it does come with trade-offs. Innate abilities and Rayman twins. Well, Rayman twins, I'm going to talk about a bit later, but it's really fascinating because Rayman was based off an actual individual, Kim Peets, but the Rayman twins were two females twins. And we'll realize that's extremely exceptional because 9 out of 10 savants are always male. Why? We don't know. There has never been savant twins before until the Rayman twins, which are two female twins. So they are beyond rare. I make them sound like kind of shiny stones. We have never had that type of individual before, or individuals. Gregory says, I thought it was someone being unbelievably innately skilled and talented at one thing. What exactly is Savant syndrome? The Britannica says Savant syndrome is a rare condition wherein a person of less than normal intelligence or severely limited emotional range has prodigious intellectual gifts in a specific area. Now, whether or not this definition I agree with completely from doing this research, I'll leave it open in the air because I think it can be way more broad. But the interesting thing is how it says here, how can you be less than normal intelligence and still be a genius? Because you will notice that a lot of these people have severe learning challenges. Like most individuals on the list that we're going to be looking at were not able to live independently despite having beyond average intelligence. As one of you rightly mentioned, The Good Doctor is a current example of an individual who has Savant syndrome. I still personally haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment on it, but I hear good things. I'm almost certain though, it is an exaggerated version of it. Because remember, he looks like he's a doctor, right? Clearly he's living independently, and real Savant syndrome, there are heavy knock-on effects. But again, there really aren't enough examples to make concrete conclusions. Oh, here's a big old number. 8 million. This is the estimated amount of savants. That's a lot of people, actually. It's not a lot of people in terms of the grand scheme of things, but in terms of something that we say is exceptionally rare, it's a quite high number. Remember how we told there was different levels of savants? So these are the ones which are just quite advanced. Individuals who are highly skilled in one area, but they aren't the ones which, when we think of Savant syndrome, this isn't that number. Now, how do we even get to 8 million? Because I'll be honest with you, this number is it accurate? Probably not. So 8 million, we got through that because there's 80 million individuals worldwide with ASD, and apparently about 10% of that may have Savant syndrome. So when we think of these autistic individuals who are like geniuses and have super innate skills in an area, that is about 10% of all individuals with autism. And that's how we get this number. We get this number through doing some basic maths. We do not get this number from any concrete research. So it's interesting that when trying to research a subject, there really isn't much data on it. And you have to do your own math in order to work out an approximation. Oh, Emma says, you heard that the portrayal of autism isn't good in The Good Doctor. No, I'm not surprised. I'm really not. Like, with all these things, I can talk about Atypical and Rayman because I've seen those. And it's, again, a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, it brings awareness, which there never was before. On the other hand, people have the wrong understanding that has lasted forever. What do we actually hope to do today? We hope to understand a little bit about the complexities of Savant syndrome. We want to learn about the neurobiology of Savant syndrome, what's actually going on in here, and also some cognitive insights. What can we gauge from it? Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to be doing little kind of images of notable savants. Let's start off with Leslie Lemke. He is a very interesting individual. He was born blind, premature, and cerebral palsy. Oh, poor geezer. Yet he was a ridiculously talented musician. And a lot of musically talented savants can be able to learn multiple musical instruments with barely any formal training. They also tend to have a level of perfect pitch and will be able to tell you the exact pitch just from hearing it, and more often than not, get it right. A really interesting example. We often talk about the autism spectrum because no single person with autism is like any other individual with autism. But again, that variation is only so much. Savant syndrome just takes it up another level. Oh, April says she's given him a quick look up, and he's 72 years old. Now, some quick history of Savant syndrome, and it all starts off with this geezer. Who is he? He is Dr. J. Langdon Down. And you'll notice the word down. Sounds like Down syndrome. You wouldn't be wrong. He is also the guy who founded it. Yeah, good on you, Dr. Lang. Now, he did a lot of good things, don't get me wrong. Dr. Down, great fella. But he was the OG original sinner when it came to stigmatizing individuals. Hence, he coined the term idiot savant. Idiot savant, not the most flattering of terms. So this is the original name when we talk about Savant syndrome. We will go on a little bit more about whether or not this is accurate or not. Well, of course it's not accurate, but why not? Oh, Jane says, I saw a TikTok where someone was saying that they think Taylor Swift is a savant autistic because of the way she socializes. Do you know what, Jane? I have never heard of that, but it's interesting. And as a massive Swiftie myself, I would love to have her on the team. She is definitely a genius, but I don't know. I would say she's too all round, I reckon. She's too perfect. What can I say? So then after this, in 1978, it was finally updated to savant because it was more respectful. It's not nice calling people idiots. And secondary, it was actually more accurate because, as we talked about, there are massive skills. How can a condition which some people know as genius syndrome also be known as idiot syndrome? There seems to be a massive disconnect here. In the 80s, the film Rayman came out with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. And yeah, honestly, I enjoyed the film. Highly inaccurate, but also not a bad first step because they actually based it off an individual who was a savant, Kim's Peak, and another one actually. Wasn't a perfect representation, but it did start awareness and curiosity into the area. Moving on to the 90s and early noughties, we started doing neuroimaging. And this is where we do scans of the head without cutting the brain open. Most people were quite happy about that. And this is where we got a deeper understanding about the different hemispheres. In a nutshell, we have two hemispheres and they are both connected. And some tasks will be done majoritarily in one, other tasks majoritarily in the others. With Savant syndrome, typically one hemisphere isn't like doing anything, not too much. And the other one is compensating and doing way more. The way I tried to explain it to someone recently was, imagine there's two analogies depending on what you're more familiar with. One, a computer. If you're someone who's into technology, if you want to get a really good gaming computer, you might do something where you force the computer to be more powerful than it actually is. But the trade-off is it might burn your computer out or it might die. And another analogy is with lights. So you have a light bulb, it has normal amount of electricity going through it, the light is on. Now, if you do too much electricity through it, the light completely explodes. But if you do a little bit more electricity than it is used to, the light bulb will be brighter than all the other light bulbs, but the light bulb isn't going to last as long. And that is like Savant syndrome, where the brain is over-processing and it's being able to show abilities and strengths and brightness like any other brain you've ever seen before. But the trade-off is it's putting the brain under immense challenges and stress, and hence why those with Savant syndrome typically do not live as long, as well as have other challenges in other areas, because other parts of the brain is being starved of, focus. Now, this is a really basic, simplistic, potentially false way of explaining it, but I think it's one that kind of gives you a starting point to see how Savant syndrome may be. Okay, great. Now, in the 2000s, we've started doing research on the syndrome and actually looking at genetic factors. Genetic factors is looking at not just what's going on in the brain, what we're doing with neuroimaging, but more so, is it something that could be inherited? Is it something which is environmental or genetics? Now, it's genetic, but we don't really know. We know very little about autism. We know a lot less about Savant syndrome. And now ongoing research is being done on neuroplasticity. Now, if any of you remember what neuroplasticity is, it's essentially that our brain isn't fixed concrete. It's plastic, which can be stretched and molded. And when, say, some brain cells die, other brain cells can redirect and reconnect. So our brain is a organic piece of meat that is always evolving and adapting. So say during early birth or during an accident, when you have an injury or underdevelopment in one area, neuroplasticity will mean our cables in our brain will connect up in other areas. And sometimes when they reconnect, genius. Other times, not genius. And other times, a mixed bag. This does make you think, though, in the future, could we reprogram our brains in order to have these Savant abilities without the downsides? It's a futuristic thought, but we aren't there yet. But it is an area which has already always made people curious. So thank you, Mr. Down. Now, some common skills. When we typically think of Savant syndrome, these are the kind of skills that people think of. It's typically in music, so having perfect pitch, being able to play musical instruments without any formal training or an insane number of them. You might be beyond good at art. There's one individual who was able to see London one time in his life and then remembered it off by heart and drew the entire London landscape perfect. You have others that had no training in maths whatsoever, and after an accident, he was able to create art with the most perfect geometric shapes imaginable. We've got calendar calculation, which is essentially what Rayman was based off of, and the Rayman twins. This is when, if someone was to ask you, hey, no, what were you doing 30 years ago to the day, and what were you wearing? And you could say the exact day, what the weather was like, what you were wearing, and you could do that for any date. It's amazingly impressive, but what are the real consequences of it? Like, how does that work? This sounds amazing, right? Being able to remember every day ever. But then if you struggle with independent living, maybe it's not really worth it. Oh yes, April. Stephen Wilkshire is the autistic savant artist who memorized the city landscape in a helicopter ride and drew it completely from memory. We've also got ones that are maths, who are really good at maths and remember to do maths so quick. And then spatial skills, different, just essentially one area being really good at. So again, we're looking at the spectrum of ability, knowing how every individual is so different. We've got splinter skills, and this is basic isolated talents. One example is the Rayman twins, these two women who we briefly spoke about. They were, I can't remember, I will remember it because I wrote it down later, but let's say Jetty as a TV show. They remembered every single episode of that entire TV game show. And if you asked them, what was the host wearing on episode 291 in 1998? They could say, oh, a red jumper with green shoelaces. Like, they would remember to the minute detail. Impressive, completely useless, but impressive. But the other areas they would need help with, again, basic living. Then we got a talented savant. This is excelling in areas like art, music, or maths. These are a lot more common than these ones. And then the prodigious, sorry about the pronunciation, read it yourself. Remarkable skills suppressing neurotypical abilities. So you can see you have like different levels almost. And the trade-offs become bigger the more benefits that you tend to get. Now, this is an image from a study, and it gives you an idea about the breakup between congenital and acquired. Essentially, which one is from birth, and that is 90%, and which ones are acquired from brain injuries. This is, I think, quite useful to know, because if you're thinking, I'm going to go out and get myself in a fight or hit myself over the head so I can have X-Men-like abilities, the likelihood of getting superhuman abilities is really small. Most savants come from birth. Let's have a look at some biological mechanisms now. How do you become a savant? Why do we not see more of them? And why is it that we really don't know that much? Oh, according to Facebook 11 years ago, I made paler. Oh, are you saying Facebook is a savant? I guess so, in a way. I guess so. They do tend to always know what I've done years ago. It's always, hey, Nat, 10 years ago, your life was still as dull. You made a pizza. I was like, oh, cool. What a memory. Or it'd be like, hey, Nat, 10 years ago, you were this friend. You had this friend. And I'm like, I'm not friends with them anymore. So yeah, screw you, Facebook. But it does seem to know. So brain structure and function. Theories, and these are the theories we do not know. It's about the left hemisphere injuries from compensation enhancements in the right. So we know we've got these hemispheres, and both hemispheres are used for everything. However, some hemispheres are more prominent in certain activities. So on here, let's say, for example, this isn't accurate, but for example, drawing abilities are in your left side. You have an injury and they're affected. So the brain's, you know what? I still want you to be good at drawing. So I'm going to rewire it so it actually happens from the right. And due to this difference, you suddenly become really good at drawing than you would have had you have not had the accident. It's like that with compensating. Of course, it's not that simple, but it gives you the idea where the brain is always adapting. It's always looking to find alternative ways around challenges. Neuroimaging has confirmed active brain regions linked to savant skills. So it is something, again, we can do scans on, and we can see that the brain is far more active in certain areas than those who do not have Savant syndrome. Really genuinely interesting. Then we go on to neuroplasticity, and we talked about this as how the brain is continuously rewiring, reshaping, getting stronger in some areas, letting other areas die and wither away. The older we get, we tend to have less connections, but they tend to be stronger connections. And when we're younger, we have loads of connections, but they're really weak and puny. Then we do have something called like cell death or synaptic pruning. And this is where we get out some scissors and we trim around. So it's perfectly normal for the brain to rewire, reshift, to kill off old cells, to enhance other cells. That's completely normal. But it's when we go to the extreme, that is what we're interested in. So neuroplasticity can foster savant abilities. It just means it creates the perfect environment. It doesn't mean that you're definitely going to get these abilities because of how rare it is. Research shows unique brain activities in skill-related areas. So we're not seeing brains which are amazing in every single aspect of life, just certain areas there tends to be way more activation than the rest of the brain would allow you to think was even possible. Then we got some genetic factors, and this goes back to your DNA. Is it something which is rooted baked into who you are? And it has been linked, often tied to ASD, but not always. And this is an area which I think is interesting because this is why I love autism personally, because the strengths do make you stand out from the crowd. It does put you in a different kind of box, a unique skill set, which arguably could make you more employable. But it does come off of a trade-off. So ultimately, is society looking for a specialist or a generalist? And if you are so specialized that you could be able to draw London from complete memory, but you would struggle to turn on a computer, you can see how we don't want complete specialists. We often want some sort of middle ground. And this is why savant abilities, it's not all it's cracked up to be from the looks of it. Ongoing studies explore the genetic basis, but we are still in the early stages. There's a few issues here. One, it's ridiculously complicated. Also, where do you find these savants? They don't always, oh, I'm here. And even if they do say, I'm here, they might not want to be tested upon. They might just want to live their life. So you can see why it's really difficult to expand this research. All right, so let's actually look at some real life case studies. And to start off with, we'll look at this guy. Now, he was probably 19th century, James Pullen, and he was called the genius of Earlswood Asylum. What a cool kind of origin name. He was ridiculously good at art. His imagination was endless. He was able to create diagrams and images that were so imaginative, yet he was imprisoned in an asylum for 70 years. He didn't get exposure to kind of inspiration or kind of a beautiful view or windows. All of this art, all of these designs came completely from his head. He spent his life in prison. I'm not sure exactly what he did, probably nothing to be honest, but it shows you that what most human beings tend to do is we can all get good at a skill by exposing ourselves to inspiration, imagery, things along those lines, and our brain absorbs it and then manipulates it. Yet some individuals can have it without even having any sort of spark to ignite it. Now, the most famous savant of all time is arguably Kim Peek, the real Rayman. Now, unfortunately, he passed away a few years back, but he truly was an exceptional individual. Not part of our team, unfortunately. Now, Kim Peek had exceptional memory, and absolutely exceptional memory. He was so good at reading. He was able to read a book just by scanning it. He even said he could read 2 pages at once, and he would completely memorize it. I think I read last time I knew, he was able to memorize over 12,500 books completely off by heart. So you could say, what happens on this page? What's the point of that? But no matter what sort of quiz question you were to ask, he would have an answer. Ridiculously impressive. He demonstrated a very broad knowledge across subjects without specialization. So it wasn't even that he had a particular interest in an area which allowed him to remember. It was just anything he digested, the brain stored. Now, we know the brain has different types of memory, long-term, short-term, and our brain only stores things in the long-term memory if it thinks it's relevant. Now, his brain thought everything was relevant and stored everything, but it maybe meant that there are other, again, trade-offs. While things seem really useful, they're not. I just want to hopefully challenge that stigma about Savant Syndrome. Neuroscientific advancements, so absence of the choroid callosum led to unique neural connections. Brain structure suggested recognition, compensating for disabilities, resulting in insight into exceptional memory. Again, it's really interesting that because one area was missing, another area picked up the weight. Reminds me of Daredevil from Marvel, where he's a normal guy, he goes blind, and suddenly he's now amazing at karate or something. So now that's an extreme version and also a fake version. But when people go blind, they do tend to get better hearing, or you might have better sense or smell. Those who have autism may struggle with socialization, so they might get far better at analytical thinking. Our brain is plastic. It is always shaping and redirecting. It's not like our potential is, you know what, because I'm no longer able to use this part of my brain or this part of my body, I'm just going to give up on that potential. It rewires that potential into another area. But yeah, a really fascinating individual. You should, if you ever get a chance, check out some videos on YouTube of him being able to do maths in his head. And he was also really happy-go-lucky, seemed like a really great individual. But you could also tell that he did have other intellectual challenges in other areas. He was very close with his dad, and I think they went everywhere together for like their entire life. April recognized him from the thumbnail. He is the poster child of Savant Syndrome, him and Dustin Hoffman. So that's probably why you see him a lot. Now, what are the implications of the neuroscience and the cognitive science? There's a few things. So let's do a few like Q&As here. So all we need to say is this kind of true or false. Savant syndrome is exclusive to autism. And I have been saying this consistently. So let's see. All savants have math skills and acquired savant syndrome possible after brain injury. False, false, true. So yeah, savant syndrome exclusive to autism. No, you do not have to have autism. But if you are autistic, there is a higher likelihood that you may be a savant. Very small, but still a lot higher than the rest of the population. All savants have math skills, not at all. It can be on any specialism that you can possibly imagine. You do not tend to have a more broad range of talents. It typically is one area. Acquired savant syndrome possible after brain injury. It is a lot rarer, but absolutely possible. It does make you think, though, that if we were to able to do a little bit of tinkering in the head, could we provoke this ability? Or is it completely random? Okay, what we got here? Imprisoned because of a mental disorder. That's interesting. Yeah, so essentially, back in the day, if you had any sort of mental disorder, they assumed you were a danger to society and locked you up. Vicky says, from what I found, thanks to Google, Pullen wasn't in prison. His mother put him... isn't an asylum, though, a prison, like a prison for mentally ill? Yeah, maybe it's just I'm always thinking of like the Joker from Batman that are not synonymous with a prison. They could be a prison or have a division, but doesn't have to be. But anyway, Vicky said that he was put there by his mum, aged 7, to live the rest of his life there. I will definitely be doing some more research after this. Oh, actually, let's have a quick look at Jason. Yeah. So he had an acquired savant syndrome after being attacked. And he was the person I was speaking about who didn't have much of a maths background, I believe. And then after then, he became a ridiculously talented artist who was able to draw geometric shapes. So that are like really intrinsic, ridiculously detailed, and very quite beautiful. But it seemingly came out of nowhere. Now on here, what is the ratio between male and female? Out of 10, how likely is it to be a male opposed to a female? And while you work out this, the lady on the left is one set of a twin. I didn't put both twins because they actually look the same. I didn't see the need to put both. But these are what were referred to as the Rayman twins. Florence and Kathleen. They had really good calendar counting abilities. This is when you could say, what were you doing on this day? What was the weather? What significant event happened? What year was this person born? They also were the individuals who knew everything about a game show to the absolute minute detail. They would never get bored. They'd watch it again and again and became ridiculous experts in an area which had no importance to anyone else but from themselves. And I wonder, is there anything in your life which you are unnecessarily knowledgeable in, which has no relevance to any other part of your life? I suppose to me, probably the Beatles and John Lennon. I don't need to know this much about them, but I made sure I knew everything I possibly could about them. Maybe it comes in handy during a pub quiz, but honestly, I still struggle to retain that information instantaneously, so it hasn't been useful, but I enjoy it. Lord of the Rings, absolutely. Oh, okay, we got my husband is a walking encyclopedia on F1. Oh, interesting, Vicky. Maybe not for you, depending on your thoughts on it. Cats and dog breed. Oh, Cat is an expert in cat. I like that. Were you originally called Cat, or did you adopt that name after the love of cats? Oh, LaDonna is also a cat lover. Okay, nice. Maybe when my cat comes in, you can tell me what breed it is. I think it's either a ragdoll or it's Russian cat, Siberian long hair. Anyway, that's for another day. What we got here, Rayman twins' name can be shortened to Flo and Kay. Oh, yes. Okay. April, thank you. They were called Flo and K, and the game they watched and made charts on was the £25 or was it pyramid. I can also recall they remembering what meals they ordered at their favorite restaurant on a particular day. Yes, they were massive fans of this really niche game show their entire life. Oh, Kat says, it's a short name, but I use my full name too. Just a coincidence. Okay, I like the coincidence though. It's if I was a really big fan of like mosquitoes, gnats. I'm not, but maybe I should be. Okay, Jane, there is a TV show that I watched and rewatched for 7 years straight. It was about 110 episodes. And if I see a photo from it, I can tell you one season and what happened in that episode. Yeah, I like that. That's impressive. I can't do it anymore, but I used to be like that with Pokemon. Like, I could tell you exactly what episode a Pokemon came out on, what its number was, how much it weighed. Again, useless, but I knew it. And I had cousins who knew at 3 years old, they knew every possible dinosaur in its complete pronunciation, but yet struggled pronouncing other seemingly basic words. So I think it is quite common to specialize in areas, but it's probably the level of specialism. Sophie says, based on the significantly biased likelihood of men to be diagnosed with things like autism and ADD rather than women, surely there will be having a bearing on the statistics. Oh, you're a smart one, Sophie. You're right. Access to education could also be a factor. A woman is less likely to be recognized for having Savant Syndrome if it expresses itself in relation to education. Then they have access rather than maths help along by the Oxbridge courses, etc. Apologies for the long one. No, you are absolutely correct on that. LaDonna doesn't like mosquitoes. Ouch. I hope that doesn't apply to me. Then you can create fact sheet on tutors even when I was young. Oh, nice. Okay, before we go off on too much of a tangent, you're absolutely right, Sophie. Men are way more likely. Now, officially, the stat that I was able to find was 6 out of 10. However, other reports have said men are way more likely. If you look at all the examples of savants, they are all male, apart from 1 or 2 examples. Now, this does relate to autism because autism is more diagnosed in males. Now, on here, I want you to rank these abilities. What do you think would be the most useful? What are you most jealous of? What would you love to have? Like maybe you want to have photographic memory and you put that kind of like number 1. Maybe you're not that bothered about being proficient in different languages. You put it out of 7. Just an idea. And while you're doing that, let's talk a little bit about the gentleman on the right. And this was Tony, and he went blind after birth. Again, was very premature. So blind very shortly after being born. And he was a autistic savant musician, extremely good at music and was able to play from a very young age and multiple instruments. You can watch videos online of him playing, extremely impressive. So what we got here, photographic memory, being able to see something and remember it from just one viewing. We've got language proficiency. So you know how it takes a lot of us forever to learn a language? Other people can learn them just from listening once and then be able to speak it. Enhanced perception, how they can experience the world. Rapid maths. Oh, what is blah, blah, blah? Yep. I do think this would be really useful if you're like, I know, working on Countdown or something. You got a calculator nowadays. Jokes. I'm just jealous. I would love it. A musical mastery. Again, speaks for itself. Advanced drawing. Insane. There are some individuals who are savants who day-to-day life really struggle with most aspects. But when they've got a pencil in their hand or a paintbrush, what comes out just doesn't match up with their other cognitive abilities. And then instant weekday determination. What's that?
Instant weekday determination.
Is that calendar counting? Yeah. I think that, weirdly enough, calendar counting tends to be the most common one from the notable cases that I've looked at. But it does seem the least useful. But it's a nice party trick. And yeah, hyperlexia as well. Oh, same. I absolutely love languages and have dabbled in rather a lot of them. I always reckon that grammar is just an extension of music theory, so it may be a similar area of the brain. That is a good theory, Sophie. Now, while we talked about a lot of the positives, don't get me wrong, it's really fun to talk about these superhuman abilities. If we continue to do that and that alone, we are just part of the problem in perpetuating this negative view, no, this oversimplified, damaging view of autism or Savant syndrome. So let's talk about the challenges. What would be the biggest downside if you had any of these conditions? Or no, any of these characteristics? All right, so we've got social cues, not being able to decode human beings. This is a big one for autism. Sensory overload, also a big one for autism. Emotional regulations, communication. Actually, most of these all relate to autism. So you can see the connection here. Motor coordination, more dyspraxia, being able to adapt, having a talent cognitive gap. I think that's a really big one. So while you might be really strong in some areas, other areas are way below average. It's, what use is some of these abilities if you aren't able to prop them up with other abilities? Okay, nice. Now, with this in mind, we've looked at the positives, we looked at some of the disadvantages. Do the talents outweigh the challenges? And I really want to know your personal opinion. If you could pick any of those abilities, would you happily take those abilities, knowing that you very well will have one or multiple of the challenges or disadvantages? Oh yeah, and on the left here, we've got some other twins actually, but these twins are male. George and Charles Finn were calculating twins. They had an extremely low IQ. 65 is a very low IQ. So big learning challenges. And yet they could do maths so quick. It really does bring into question, doesn't it, what we mean by intelligence and IQ tests? And a test isn't about one area. It's more about an overall opinion. So you might say, I have a bit of a low IQ. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. No, you could still be very talented and very skilled in one area or a few areas. It just doesn't translate to all areas in life. So it really backs up their kind of spiky profile. The tests are biased towards neurotypical individuals because it takes the entire cognition into consideration. But these individuals very well may be better at maths than the highest IQ person to ever live, but they would not match up in any of the other areas. Depends on the skills and the challenges. I struggle enough without Savant abilities. Nothing would make it worthwhile or make my life harder. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. Most of you do the talents. Oh, it's 50-50. That is really interesting. I'm tempted to say no. While it would be cool and you probably would get your own Wikipedia page, you probably wouldn't appreciate it. And the challenges probably, let's face it, like we always remember challenging times more than we remember the easier times. I think you're right. This comes down to personal opinion, doesn't it? I think I'd rather not have it, but it depends, doesn't it? It really does. Now, do you ever use the term idiot? Be honest with me. It's anonymous. Yes, no, sometimes. Most people use it in day-to-day language, but they don't often understand what it actually means or where it comes from. Sometimes, yes, at least you're being honest. Now, when we think of idiot, we think of the village idiot, but idiot was a name that was always used for savants or people with learning disabilities. And they looked at it from one angle, and it became quite damaging, to be honest. Now, when we look at terminology, I wanted to ask that question because is Savant syndrome a real condition? It is, but is it in the DSM? Is it in the ICD-11, the kind of Bibles of diagnostic for America and the rest of the world? No, they are not in those books. It is not an official condition, but it is a recognized set of characteristics. Idiot is not nice to call someone. And it's because of the connotations. It limits someone's potential. Yep, no, it's not descriptive enough. No, it only tells you one particular aspect, even though that aspect's not nice. The change in language and meaning of idiot makes inappropriate terminology in present day. It was always negative even back in the day, but you're right. Our understanding of how words do change dramatically over time. Like, for instance, words like, and I apologize for using it, but it was a legit word, like mental retardation. That word is horrible, but it was a legit term. Or like handicapped, or there's loads of words which are considered a bit icky today, but were perfectly fine to use. But words develop meaning and they grow over time. But idiot, I believe it has always been negative, but prove me wrong if you know otherwise. Yep. Do you know what, April? I appreciate you being honest. You're saying when you see people cross the road and kind of not paying it, like crossing on the red man, you secretly call them an idiot. Whenever I'm like on the escalators in London and someone is standing on the left side where you're meant to walk, I'm like, idiots. And that's basically my internal road rage on the escalators talking. But it's not nice. No, it's not nice. I think we do it, but we don't always understand the baggage that these words have attached to them. Before we can really understand this, we've got to ask a few questions. So first of all, what is a congenital savant autism? There's loads of papers on it, but this is just to make sure what we actually mean by these different terms. This is the most common type of savant. I have already mentioned it, so, fingers crossed. Savant abilities from birth. Yes, bang on the money there. So this is just the official way of saying those who had it from birth who also have autism or autism characteristics. Nice and simple. So a few misunderstandings of Savant syndrome. First of all, it's misleading. That's why you got rid of idiot savant. It was misleading and not even accurate. It's mean, don't get me wrong, but it's not even accurate. It also implies a uniform skill set. No, it is a massive fluctuation. Focus on skills, it neglects broader challenges. So when we talk about Savant syndrome, we talk about the abilities, we don't talk about the challenges. It overlooks difficulties, ignores non-skills related needs. So what about the things that aren't related to skills? It has a very wide variety, and truly every single one with Savant syndrome is so unique, so it's hard to draw any true conclusions. We have an oversimplification of the cognition, and we don't take the entire profile into consideration. There isn't a holistic view of Savant syndrome, so we don't look at how it impacts life. We just look at particular aspects. And the stereotype of Lerman is one that has prevailed from the 80s. I don't know why, but this is all we think about when we think of Savant syndrome. So some takeaways is when we think of Savant syndrome, it's a few things. Great skills are part of it. Diverse abilities, all those skills aren't always equal. Early onset, typically it happens from birth or like very early after birth when the brain is still connecting. Though it also can happen through acquired, being like something physical. There is a link to autism. Doesn't have to be, but there is a link. And before you're like, I'm pretty certain I'm a savant, yeah, maybe, but it's very rare. Now, if any of you savants, here are some next steps. So explore medical journals and books. I'm afraid you're going to have to get sciencey because the information you explore on Google is just going to be showing you all the fun abilities. They do not show you the entire journey. Reputable websites. All this means is websites which are legit because there is a lot of dodgy information online. Sorting through what was true and was just myth and speculation took a while. University websites, quite good for it. Documentaries, while there's always an element of bias in them, are pretty good. And the one April mentioned, the Rayman twins, is a particularly good one. And you could consult experts in ND condition. But honestly, you probably ain't going to find an expert in this sector. It's very, very niche. So you'd have to go real specialized. There are some books I'd recommend though. And we've got The Mind Tree, A Miraculous Child Breaks the Silence of Autism. This is talking about a type of Savant syndrome. Born on a Blue Day, this is a very relevant book, and Daniel is also a savant. The Encyclopedia of Savants, this is quite a fun book and gave a good overview understanding. And Extraordinary People is another good overall understanding. But if I would recommend Born on a Blue Day, I found that one the most interesting, and I actually read the entire of that one, where the other ones I kind of skim read. Oh, one of my friends gave me Born on a Blue Day for my birthday last year, although I haven't yet to read it. When you do, April, do let me know. Now, our next webinar is predominantly Inattentive ADHD. So this is ADHD without hyperactivity, or commonly more known as ADD. And we're going to be looking at ADHD through a more of an inattentive lens. Now, we do know more females tend to be inattentive than they do hyperactive. So we're just going to be looking at some of the signs, characteristics and traits that follow. So this will be a nice kind of fun overlook at the characteristics which differ from the hyperactive ones, which people typically look for. And you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to. Now, please do. We are ridiculously close to 5,000. Like, I will be very happy when we get to 5,000. So yeah, dude, click that little subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring the bell, do whatever you need to do. And here's our contact information. If you ever want to find out more, you can always drop us a message. I hope you found that useful and interesting. Maybe not that useful for day-to-day life, but still a nice way to spend your Thursday. And also, I think it genuinely is a really good way to understand where this idea of the genius autistic child has come from and where it has developed and grown over time. Okay, well, hopefully see you all at the next webinar. Have a great day, everyone, and have a great time. Jane, thank you. Kat, Emma, Vicky, Sophie, Kelly, Peg, Gregory, Sophie, everyone. April, as always, thank you. And catch you all soon.